because we want to be sharing these conversations with the world. So thanks for approving that. And maybe with that, we will jump in and we'll let people join us as they can. Kim will keep an eye on the room for us. So everyone, happy Wednesday. Good to see you all. Appreciate you taking some time to be with us today. And joining us for our next edition of Conversations That Matter. This, of course, is a partnership between the good people at PIN and ForSimpleWords.ca. And as you may recall, we started this in February to celebrate Ontario's first Nonprofit Appreciation Week. I want to make sure I get that right. And Kim and I got together in late February and said, gosh, what can we do? Would it be interesting to maybe pull some smart people together and have some conversations? It resulted in a full week of these. Your feedback said they didn't suck very much, which we really appreciated. And so we want to keep this going. So we're hopefully going to be doing these once a month, once every other month, on topics and conversations that are relevant to the good work that we're all doing in the not-for-profit sector. My name is Curt Hammond. I'm the Chief Learning Officer at ForSimpleWords.ca. And again, this is a great partnership between ForSimpleWords.ca and PinNetwork.ca, and we appreciate your time. Before we jump in, we're going to do a land acknowledgement, as we always do at these sessions. So we're just going to take some time to ground us in that. And we're coming together from across the province today, which is really exciting. And I want to remind us that no matter where we're sitting, no matter where our screens are, there were peoples, cultures, and traditions on these very lands long before we were. And these wise peoples did their best to help us steward our land, our water, and our air. Now, unfortunately, we have done a terrible job at listening to their wisdom, and our environment is now paying that price. Even worse than that, in fact, much worse than that, we have yet to fully acknowledge and recognize that our communities are literally built on top of theirs. And we can no longer turn away from the economic, social, and emotional damage that we have done to generations of families across this country. And while I have no solutions today to that problem, it's important that we recognize that as we gather today and think about building community, leadership, strengthening the world for others, that those are traditions that started with indigenous cultures. And it's our honor today to be using them and leveraging them and leaning into our leadership with them. Equally important, it's up to us to remind future leaders that as they think about building community, leading community, and supporting one another, that those are values that came from indigenous cultures that we are so lucky to benefit from. So again, no solutions to solving that problem today, except to remind us that the land we're on is stolen. We each have a responsibility to right relations with our Indigenous sisters and brothers. And here in Canada in particular, we have to remember that truth has to come before reconciliation. So thanks for that time. It's important that we ground ourselves in that conversation. So let's move on to today's topic. It's election season, everybody. Are we excited? Right? This is the time, yeah, what? This is the time of year that I think, for the most part, well-intentioned individuals are approaching us, asking for their support, asking us for their support to vote for them. And that this conversation got Kim and I wondering, what are some of the opportunities for not-for-profit sectors as we think about the two elections coming up? We've got a provincial election on June 2, and then we have a municipal election happening on October 24th, I think it is, both of which could have some impact on or will have some impact on our organizations. So we said, well, who could help us think about this important conversation? And of course, we immediately turned to our good friends at the Ontario Not-for-Profit Network. And they were very keen and eager to support us. In particular, Candice Zhang is joining us tonight, and I'll formally introduce Candice in a bit. But we're having this conversation around advocacy, what that looks like for our sector, and specifically some opportunities for us as we think about the provincial and municipal election. Before we jump in, maybe a quick observation. We've made this comment before. The not-for-profit sector is a $50 billion sector in Ontario. That is bigger than the automotive and construction sectors combined. Again, that still blows my mind. And I want to relate back, how that relates back to our conversation today, I think, is that both those sectors are very good at lobbying for their needs. And there's nothing wrong with that. I fully want to, you know, that is, I think that is part of their responsibility to their goals. I don't think we as a sector are that good at it, to be honest with you. I think we maybe get a little shy with it, and we're not sure about that. So I think the timing on this conversation today is really interesting, and I want to just reflect that as a sector, there's opportunities here for us to be perhaps having more impact and perhaps stretching our own mission, vision, and values even more. So, and before we jump in, a quick reminder, this is a partnership between the PIN Network and 4 Simple Words, which is a learning journey that I'm on that is thinking about what it means to be in service to others. I just want to quickly remind us on a little bit around that. The 4 simple words were given to me by my grandmother early on in my life. And the 4 simple words are, it's not about me. It's not about me. Let's say that together on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. It's not about me. I'm going to offer you, haven't said anything that freeing today, this week, and probably this year, because I really do believe that my grandmother's wisdom, my grandmother's name was Elsie, Elsie's wisdom can help us simplify our life, clear our mind, and amplify our impact. The other conversation we had in February was how I really think we need to move away from this idea of servant leadership, of which I used to practice. And now we should think about, explore, and grow this idea of service leadership. And really quickly, the headline there is servant leadership is this. And it is impossible for us to be in an equitable relationship when one person is acting as a servant to another. Service leadership asks that we do so in equity and with mutual benefit to one another. And as we think about service leadership, a reminder that it starts with incredible self-awareness. Who I am, what turns me on, what turns me off, what value I can add. When I am emboldened with that freedom that self-awareness brings, I'm then able to pop up my head and say, where could I actually get involved? Who or what could I be in service to? And finally, the last piece then is that when I'm in service to something, I'm going to create a transparent and open relationship that we're clear on the kind of service you need from me, which is of benefit for 2 reasons. I'm making sure you need what you want. And when I'm done, which allows me to go back to step number 1, check in on my own energy and needs and continue that cycle again. I encourage you to visit 4simplewords.ca to learn more. And related, I want to share very quickly a project that relates to both this idea of being in equity with others and democracy. And I want to point your attention to, I'm taking off my 4 Simple Words hat and putting on my volunteer hat now, municipalcampaignschool.ca, and perhaps Kim can pop that in the chat for us, municipalcampaignschool.ca. This is a volunteer-led effort to encourage women and other equity-seeking groups to run for office this fall, for municipal office in particular. Because we know that if you don't look like me, it's hard to get resources, supports, and network to build an efficient and effective campaign. And that just isn't right. Right now, men make up, I think it's 78% of municipal council members across the province. Obviously, that does not reflect the diversity and the strength and the needs of our community. So municipalcampaignSchool.ca is a partnership between Centre Wellington, Guelph, and the good people in Oxford County. When you go to the site, you'll see resources, click on our videos. You're going to see about 14 different videos right now, which are interviews with experienced, smart, professional politicians and politicals, sharing insights on what it means and how we can be building better and more effective municipal campaigns. It's all free. We were originally going to do this in person. The gift of COVID is now that we can share it with the world. So I want to share that with you today as we think about equity, as we think about democracy. I think there's a nice overlap there. So municipalcampaignSchool.ca, visit it, share it, and related to that, of course, is we need to be asking voices and leaders in our community to run, and then we need to be asking how we can support them. So I'll leave that with you and appreciate you sharing that with your networks. All right, 12 after, perfect. We are talking about our democracy today. We're talking about this idea of advocacy. And we're so excited that Candice Zhang from Ontario Not-for-Profit Network can join us. And you can find them at theonn.ca. And I actually encourage you to go there now. So theonn.ca, on their landing page, it's going to be a link that is going to that you can link to this amazing PDF they put together with resources around advocacy for this provincial election. What a quinky dink, eh? Like, this is all coming together, right? It's almost like we know what we're doing. This is an amazing resource. If I've been able to spend some time with this morning, I encourage you to give that a look and may influence some of the questions that we have with Candice today. So onn.ca, the link is there in the chat. Download that and give it a look. Let's introduce Candice and then we'll get into our conversation. So Candice Zhang, who uses the pronouns she and her, is a policy advisor at the Ontario Not-for-Profit Network. And stemming from her passion for social change, public policy, and innovation, Candice has pursued various opportunities in policy analysis, research, project management with a number of different organizations. She has worked with diverse populations, including youth, LGBTQ plus S communities, people living with HIV, as well as Canadians affected by housing and income inequalities. Candice holds a master's degree in global health policy from the University of Edinburgh. Can you imagine what that campus must look like? Oh my goodness. And in addition to that, a Bachelor of Science degree in biology from Queen's University. So how about a warm Conversations That Matter welcome to Candice Zhang from the Ontario Not-for-Profit Network. Candice, nice to have you here today.
Glad to be here, and thank you so much for the opportunity to share.
Well, we're so grateful for your bringing a really important lens for this. It's an important conversation. I want to start that we're not going to get into the weeds on what we can and can't do, because that becomes very technical very quickly. Candice and her team have put this booklet together. If you're looking for the specifics around what we can and can't do, there's a nice little checklist in here. So again, I encourage you to download that and give that some time. So Candice, thanks so much for being here. Can you help us describe and understand what we mean by this idea of advocacy? What does that really mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I think just like from your introduction of me, I think folks can see I don't really have a degree in like political science or anything that sounds like advocacy related, but that's the work that I'm doing right now. And I really want to throw a question to our audience, which is I invite everyone to think about, so like close your eyes and picture what comes to your mind when you hear the term advocate. Like, who are you picturing? What are you picturing? Are you thinking of someone who is leading or participating in the protest? Or is this someone whose job title contains the word like full-time lobbyist or involves the word advocacy? And then what about someone who is just passionate about something? For example, someone who's really passionate about the environment or recycling, and they're just spreading the word to their friends and family about the importance of recycling and how to do it properly. Do you think of them as an advocate? What about someone who's organizing a food drive to collect food donations? Do you think you or your organization currently engage in advocacy work? So yeah, if you go onto the internet and search the definition of advocacy, you might see like it means like giving a person support, have their voices heard, or some other like very technical forms of definitions. And the words like democracy and advocacy are such big words, and sometimes it sounds very intimidating. But oftentimes each one of us are already doing advocacy work in our day-to-day life or in our day-to-day job, whether we call it that or not, right? Like sharing and communicating the mission of our organization to others is already considered as advocacy work. It's a form of advocacy. For example, to better leverage our mission, we nonprofits often connect with others who work on similar or complementary issues. And this is the core of advocacy, when organizations or individuals come together, work together, and use their collective voice to move their mission forward. And I want to say like, oh yeah, sorry, Curt.
No, please go ahead. Sorry, Candice, go ahead.
And I just want to say, like, nonprofits, by our very existence, we're trying to make the world a better place. We're trying to work with our communities. And that in itself is a true form of advocacy.
I really like this, Candice. And again, we chatted last week, and you kind of blew my mind a little bit around what this definition of advocacy is. And, you know, traditionally, and I've helped clients sit down in front of MPPs and say, okay, this is what you need to know about this issue. But it really can be a part of our broader communications and engagement plan, can it? It's not just one, it can be, there are multiple parts to it. And it doesn't always have to be about getting in front of that MPP. That's a really great insight. Let's jump, I would love to hear from our audience, but Kim has a poll that she's going to put in front of us, and then Candice, let's reflect on that, and that'll lead us into our next question. The question that you're going to be asking is, our agency puts time and energy into an intentional advocacy plan. I just kind of like to read the room around what your relationship with this word advocacy or work is. So I'll give you a second to respond to that. And we will then share those results. And Kim, I'm not seeing, I think, are you seeing the results come in, Kim? Excellent. So Kim, when we're almost there, you can open up that answer for us. And again, I think this is hopefully a good start to our learning today, that advocacy isn't just about writing letters and sitting in front of leaders. It can include lots of other things. So here we go. So Candice, I'm wondering what your reflections on that poll are. You'll see it's kind of spread around. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think based on our recent conversations with other organizations, this seems about right. It's like the general trend. A lot of us do some sort of advocacy work, puts time and energy into having an advocacy plan, but not a lot of us do, like dedicate a ton of time and energy into that work. And some of us haven't really started that journey yet. So yeah, kind of what I expected.
Yeah, okay. So and I encourage people to jump in with questions in the chat. We've got a few that we want to start with, but we really want to follow your lead here. So jump in with questions in the chat. Candice, let's chat about the why. We've got a bit of an understanding what that is, but why should we be thinking about advocacy as not-for-profits?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Where do I even begin? There are so many reasons why, especially during an election year. But I think maybe I can start with like a personal story, just put into a little bit of perspective of one of the roles that nonprofits play. So I came to Canada around 10 years ago as an international student. So, as an international student, I'm not a Canadian citizen, I didn't have the right to vote. However, every election was very important to me because the new government, whoever gets elected, they're going to be making policy decisions that is going to affect me, right? Like it could be immigration policies, anything related to education or youth, employment. As a student, I was really worried about like getting a job after I graduate. But sometimes I just felt like this sense of hopelessness, because how could I get my voice out there? How could I make sure that those politicians or government know what I'm thinking if I'm not even allowed to vote? And I think that's where community organizations and nonprofits, like their role really comes into play. Like, there are organizations in my community who do advocacy work for newcomers and international students. So one of the ways I could feel more heard and have my opinions, like channel my energy somewhere, is to talk to those organizations. And a lot of those organizations, they host like meetings and some sort of convenings where they go into the community, they hear what the communities want, and they act as a bridge between those communities and the government. Nonprofits, they're always at the front line working with communities. They know what is happening on the ground. So they can then take this knowledge to the government and tell them, hey, we want to make sure those voices are included. We want to make sure you include the perspective of those folks. Right. So kind of like from my personal experience, one of the very key roles that nonprofit organizations play.
Right.
And that kind of is the reason why we really should participate in advocacy work. It's we're in a really good position to do those type of work. On top of that, a lot of the issues that we as nonprofits work on, it requires systematic changes, right? Like if you are a food bank, or so if you're working on issues related to affordable housing, like those are so related, like policy plays such a big part to address the underlying causes of poverty. So advocacy can really have an impact on individuals or communities that we as nonprofits serve. And especially during election year, there are lots of discussions taking place on the internet, around your family, friends groups, and we need to make sure that our community's voices and perspectives are not missing from those very important conversations.
I love that.
Mm-hmm.
I think, and so we've almost got sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I'm hearing almost a responsibility in some ways that we have here, right? And I want to tie that in with this idea, because what I hear sometimes from clients is, oh, I don't think it's our place, and I just don't know if, there's confusion around rules, which is, what is and isn't legal, but there's also this, oh, is it our place? And I think what I'm hearing from you, I think what we're hearing is that, in fact, it very much is our place to be pointing to these conversations. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And it's not just about the people that we work with, the communities that we work to serve. It's also about us. We as a sector, as Curt, as you mentioned earlier, we have a huge impact as a sector. We recently just released a new infographic about the nonprofit sector in Ontario. I'll put the link in the chat as well. And we as a sector, we create meaningful jobs. We employ more than 800,000 people in Ontario, and we contribute. We make great contributions to Ontario's GDP, but oftentimes we are kind of like forgotten by the government.
Right.
Which can be reflected by a lot of the COVID measures during the pandemic. When they make decisions, they think about the impact on a lot of other sectors, but the nonprofit sector. So, the election is a great opportunity for us to make our voices heard as a sector, to let the government know, we're doing important work. We need your support. You need to consider the impact of your policies on our sector. So even from the perspective of ourselves as a sector, this is a really great opportunity for us to have our voices heard and to let them know what we're demanding, how they can better support the sector, how they can better fund us, right?
Right. Yeah. Excellent. So we have a right and responsibility, for lack of a better word, and maybe there's a courage or a new muscle that we need to stretch here. So let's chat a bit about the how, and I think that's, we get into those weeds pretty fast, but people, this comes back to the what is it, but talk to us about the how a little bit at a high level, and then we can get in thinking about some more tactics. And again, if you haven't done so, please download that document from ONN. There's lots of great stuff in there around some of this as well. So Candice, talk to us about the how.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I mean, it can sound kind of like overwhelming if you haven't already, if like advocacy work is something new to your organization. So, kind of like goal setting is a very important first step to identify what is it that we want to achieve with our advocacy work. And one of the frameworks that I found really helpful is a SMART goal setting method. So SMART, stands for specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time bound. And how does that look for like election advocacy work specifically? Is that, for example, maybe you want to get your organization's policy priorities on political parties' election platforms, on candidates' election platform. And then the way So that's pretty specific. And how do you measure that? So the way you can measure that is to see first whether or not your policy priorities are reflected in any of the candidates' election platforms. And if so, how many of them? And if you have more than one policy priorities, how many of those were included in each candidate's election platform? And is it achievable? Is it realistic for your organization? And I think the piece of being achievable and realistic is so important right now, especially for this year. I just want to pause a moment and to acknowledge how, as a sector, we've done so much throughout the pandemic, despite all the challenges that we faced. There's decreased in revenue, increase in demand for services, but despite all that, we really came together and stretched ourselves really thin sometimes to make sure we can be there for our community. Right. So I think it's very important that we also practice care for ourselves and be kind to ourselves, right? Like a lot of times I hear from organizations when we talk about like doing advocacy work during elections, and people are saying, we're so burned out. We are so tired. We're doing so much. I just think it's too overwhelming to be taking on this new work. But it's no action is too small, right? Like I would suggest, like, before you set your goal, take a moment, take a pause, and look at where you're at. What are your capacities? What are some of the resources that are available to you? And based on that, we set a goal that is realistic and achievable to us.
Right. So I was going to say, building on that, and this feeds back into a conversation that we had in our call last week, and you planted the seed of, do we want to amplify or do we want to create? So can you talk to us about that in terms of this is around the how? Do you want to amplify or do we want to create? That's a really good insight.
Yeah, absolutely. So once you kind of like know what your goal is, that's what kind of like determines what your strategies are going to be. And once again, like your capacity and resources also play a very important role. If there's one takeaway that you get from our conversation today, I hope that is it can be very, very easy. Like advocacy work can be super simple, and that is what Curt just mentioned, amplifying or creating. There are many, many ways to get involved. It doesn't necessarily have to look like running a super huge election advocacy campaign where you create a new web page and you create all those new resources and like run a big campaign where you reach out to like tons of other organizations, which takes a lot of time and energy. It doesn't necessarily have to look like that, right? So one of the very simple ways that you can be engaged in election advocacy is simply to amplify community and network voices. So what that looks like could be, what that could look like is that, for example, if you work in food insecurity, once again, then instead of creating something new, you can look into other organizations that are doing similar work as you are, and see if they are doing anything election related. So for example, I know Feed Ontario, they are doing a lot of really great work related to election advocacy. So what you can do is, look at what they're doing. If they have any communication pieces, simply share that on your social media platform. It's a really great way to get started, because the more people talk about those issues, the better, right? Right. And then there are also many individuals within your network who are, people with lived experiences, who are knowledge holders in your community, and maybe as individuals, they are doing some very important work related to election advocacy as well. So maybe as an organization, what you can do is provide a bigger platform for their voices to be heard. So share their content, share their posts on your social media. So that is also a very great way, and it's relatively like low energy. So like it doesn't require a lot of financial resources or a lot of time, right? It's just like a click of a button. Right.
Excellent. That's good.
Yeah.
I see Morgan's in the chat is demonstrating what good advocacy looks like. She's I noticed that she is pointing us to a Facebook group that she's part of, Thursday mornings 8 to 9:30. Looks like they are this week talking about buses and bylines. So great example there. Thank you, Morgan, for sharing conversations we're already in with other people and asking them to amplify that. So thanks, Morgan. A way to advocate right in the call. I love it. You're showing us how it's done. What are some of the things we need to be thinking about, Candice, as we think about our how? What are some other practical things that we should be keeping in mind, or thinking about as we build out a plan around a how?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So I would say, really think about kind of like back to like what it is that you're hoping to achieve, and also be, I guess, be aware of the fact that what you're trying to achieve doesn't necessarily have to be like a short-term goal. Sometimes it can be a long-term goal as well. So advocacy work, it's usually a very long process. When I first were thinking about getting into like doing something more related to policy and advocacy, I was talking to other folks who were already doing the job just to like see what they think. And one of the questions I remember they asked me was, are you a super duper results oriented person? Because policy process, it's a long journey. If you are hoping to see change within like a few months or a year, that might not happen. Sometimes it might take 5 years, 10 years in order for us to see change. And I think that's very insightful and important to keep in mind. We're doing our advocacy work throughout this election. Is that it's a great point to start, and it's a great opportunity that we shouldn't miss this window of opportunity. But at the same time, it doesn't mean we have to stop right after the election is done. Doesn't mean if we didn't see change right away after this election, and it's like super frustrating. There's no hope, right?
Right.
And one of the examples, like one of the ways that organizations can engage in election advocacy is actually to reach out to your candidates. During elections, like candidates are usually more open than usual to meet with their constituents, because they want to hear what communities are thinking. They want to, get your vote, get your support. So it's a great opportunity to reach out to them and ask for a meeting. And during those meetings, you can share your mission with them, share the issues that you're working on with them, tell them why your issues are important, and those are the solutions that you're proposing. And even if you don't see immediate change, this is a really great way to start building a good relationship with those candidates, with those MPPs, because you never know what's going to happen. Maybe one day they will become a cabinet minister who's going to be making those policy decisions. And when that happens, you already have this connection with them. They already know who you are, what kind of work you're doing. And you know what else is really great is if you meet with them a few times and really demonstrate to them that you know what you're doing, you have a lot of knowledge, you're an expert on your issue. They might even reach out to you when they need advice on a certain policy issue in the future. I think long term.
I was going to say that, I love that. And that's when the magic happens too, right? When we've built those relationships with these thought leaders, or positioned ourselves as a thought leader, and people have reached back into us. I think that's a really great point, the more we keep at it. There's a great question here on timing. Candice, I wonder if you could reflect on this. Kara's wondering, how do we choose the right time to advocate? What if we aren't ready pre-election with our ask and messages? Like the intensity around the provincial election is right now. So can you talk to us more about the cycle of good advocacy? We obviously get caught up in elections, but there's lots can be happening off cycle as well. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's a really great question. Thank you so much for that question. I think it's kind of ties into what I touched upon a little bit about thinking long term, but also, this the election is what, like less than 2 months away. So I understand that the timeline is pretty tight. So you might not always have everything ready to kind of like share your asks and messages. I would suggest that one of the ways to kind of stay engaged pre-election is to keep track of what everyone is saying, what every party is saying. There's so much information out there during before election. Different parties, they release like new announcements, new commitments like every week. It could be kind of hard to keep track of that. So I would say if you have the time and energy, I highly recommend like documenting what every party is saying about the issues that you're working on. And even better, if you could maybe put it into like a table and share it with, make it public, share it with your network, put it in your newsletter so that others can also learn what each party is saying. So you're kind of almost like you're doing this one thing, but you're multiplying the effect, the impact of this party platform analysis that you're doing. And I can share in the chat one example from this organization, NAPSI. They are already doing, keeping track of what everyone is saying. They're already doing a little bit of the party platform analysis, which can offer an example of what it could look like. I just popped it in the chat.
Excellent.
And you can see it's like a table with like policy issues in one column and then cross-tabulated against like all 4 different political parties. Yeah, so it's a way for you to keep track for now. And then after the election, when you feel more prepared or have more time and energy, what you can do is, see who got elected and send them a congratulatory letter. Say like, hey, congratulations on like being elected or being appointed as like this cabinet minister. We would welcome to have the opportunity to chat with you as you take on your new role. And here are some of the things we're hoping to be able to talk to you about. And that is where you can list your priorities and your asks. Because as we mentioned before, it doesn't stop at the election. Like post-election is actually also very important as the new government try to gather more ideas of what they want to do. So reach out to them then, saying congratulations, ask for a meeting, share your asks and your messages.
And so it's a good reminder that our advocacy plan should probably align with our communications plan, and that we've identified, it's all about our audiences. We've identified those key voices we want to connect with, be it our MPPs or local council, whatever's relevant, and then doing our best. And all I'm doing is making work for people here. I totally appreciate that. In addition to all the other good work we're doing, touching base with them off cycle so that when it comes to election time like this, all that pre-work has led up to this. I think that's a really that's a good reminder for us. And I encourage everyone to have a link, click on that link that Candice shared. Really simple, but what a great way to give an overview to your staff, but also to your board. I mean, there's lots of people in our organizations we can be sharing that document with. Morgan's got lots of great things going on in the chat here. I encourage you to have a look at that. She's reminding us what's in the local things and places we can be meeting with candidates. And what's this last one? You can check it out. You want to remember everything the current government is taken from it. Oh, okay. So there's some advocacy going on there. All right. Well done, Morgan. Excellent. I encourage other people to drop questions in for Candice in the chat. If you have anything specifically you'd like her to reflect on. Candice, maybe while people are thinking about that, one of the other things that, again, you opened my mind to was this idea of something that I'm doing on my own as my organization or as a collective. Like we can be working with other organizations around these issues. So talk to us a bit about that, going it alone or being on a larger team.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely power in collective advocacy. as we've seen throughout the pandemic, I think even before the pandemic, of course, there was a lot of collaboration happening within the sector. But during the pandemic is where we really saw organizations coming together and forming like coalitions, working with each other to push their mission forward. And it really worked. For example, recently, we heard like the federal provincial bilateral childcare agreement, and recently they made the pandemic pay increase for personal support workers permanent,
Right.
and those could only happen because so many organizations working on those issues came together. They kind of like talked to each other, aligned their messages, aligned their language, so they are saying the same things over and over again from different organizations to the government. And it also showed that, this idea of like long-term gain, right? People have been talking about those things for years, but the pandemic really showed like kind of like this urgency to solve those issues, to address those issues. And then when organizations come together with their collective voice and amplify each other's messages, it really like put pressure on the government to act. And also think out of the box. Like sometimes it really helps if you involve the unusual suspect in the work that you do.
Interesting.
So for example, like if we're talking about housing, maybe your first instinct is to reach out to other organizations whose mission is to address affordable housing. But once again, what about poverty reduction organizations? What about organizations working with the people who experience homelessness and food insecurity, like reach out to them?
Right.
And then, in the case of childcare specifically, the Ontario Chamber of Commerce actually worked with a lot of nonprofit or other nonprofit organizations working childcare to say, we agree, we think like we should have affordable childcare in Ontario and how that is important from like the perspective of small businesses.
Mm-hmm.
So that really showed how powerful it is to collaborate with each other and to build those connections and build those relationships. And once again, election is a very great time to get started and to keep the momentum going. If you've kind of been working in silos, maybe your goal for this election is to start building a bigger network to reach out to others who are doing the same work.
Yeah, such wise words, Candice, because I think this idea of, and the chamber might not be the first place that anyone on this call might think about as a partner, right? For whatever reason. However, their leaning into that effort was a really natural opportunity. So I think there are places, if we get, I really like your language there, if we get creative around finding interesting partnerships and how we can find some commonality, that adds value into our message. Quarter two, we're right on track. I want to maybe get into the weeds just a little bit to think about some practical things that we could be doing. And again, if you've had a chance to download that document, look at page 25 and 26, where there's, you've outlined some specific tactics that organizations can put together through elections, Candice. And I'm wondering if this idea of, let's talk about all candidates meetings, because they seem to be hot places. So both organizing one and attending one. Can we just get into the weeds a little bit around what might be some practical things we could do around organizing an all candidates and or attending another one and leveraging that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I might start with the attending one because it's easier, relatively easier. So, like attending those events are such a great way to get involved, and you don't have to spend a lot of energy organizing those events. All you gotta do is make sure you do your research and follow some like maybe some organizations whose mission is to promote civic engagement. Then they might share a lot of those opportunities and events. with your network. So like at ONN, we just recently added a section in our monthly newsletter where it's dedicated to elections. And over there, we share a lot of election-related events, as well as those all candidates debates and stuff and things like that. So tap into those resources, look into what is happening. And, you know, with COVID, so many things are happening virtually. So it's really like even easier to attend those events.
Right.
I actually went to one a while ago where the Liberal Party was talking about their platform. And, you know, towards the end, there's always a Q&A session. And that is when we have an opportunity to speak. There were folks from like some other nonprofits who took that opportunity and asked really great questions, you know, and that's where you can show them like, hey, remember, we're here to hold you accountable, and you need to listen to our voices. So I think that is a really great way to share with candidates what matters to you, what you're working on, without having to organize something yourself.
Right.
And in terms of if you're thinking of hosting one or organize one, I would say the most important thing to keep in mind is to reach out to all political parties, because it's very important, especially for registered charities, that we stay nonpartisan. So that means don't focus on one party or one candidate. Always make sure you reach out to all political parties. So yeah, so that's something to keep in mind if you're thinking of hosting one.
That's brilliant advice. And as a communicator, let me just build on, if I can, your idea of a question. Such a powerful tool, right? And the framing of that question. This is where framing, and we actually have a conversation at municipalcampaignschool.ca around the power of framing. And so how we bring those questions to table is really, really important and such a powerful tool. So here's an interesting question from Morgan on that. And then I want to come back to this idea of non-partisanship. Morgan's actually, she's asking, can all political parties be limited to the big four? Like there are a lot of, we're seeing a lot more political parties forming. Any thoughts there or any guidance you have for us on how we can be being as inclusive as possible with those invitations? And if 7 people show up, we need 7 chairs. Is that basically how it rolls?
I think usually like the big four is fine. That's considered as nonpartisan, so that is no problem. I also just shared in the chat some other like events that are happening where party leaders debate in Northern Ontario on issues facing Northern Ontario, with a link in the chat. And, you know, I just wanted to add, something I just wanted to add is also, you know, there are a lot of resources out there, like Curt was saying, like our election toolkit, and, you know, like Democratic Engagement Exchange, for example, they also have a lot of really great resources. They have like a voter pop-up toolkit where like if you order that, everything is there. So it makes it very easy for you to organize like a voter pop-up event. So just really like look out there. There's a lot of resources. Make use of those resources, and that should be like really helpful as well.
Yeah. I want to circle back to this idea. Thank you for that. I want to circle back to this idea and just have a quick conversation around non-partisanship, because I think the key here is that when we are out asking for change, and help me with my language here, it can't be directed at any specific political party. It needs to be focused on an issue. Is that a good distinction? That when we talk, we want to talk about the change we want to see to issues versus any particular reflection that a party has. Is that a good distinction? Is that a good way to think about non-partisanship, or is there a better way? I'm sure there is.
So I would say, you know, think about like our intention, right? For us, it doesn't really matter who people vote for, our goal is to first empower people to participate in this democratic process, and then also to make sure whoever is in government is doing things that benefit our communities. So with that in mind, when you're doing your work, I think it really helped to guide you to make sure, like, I'm not just focusing on this one political party. I'm not like promoting them. I'm not promoting the party or opposing the party or the candidate. What I'm trying to do is simply speak the fact, like as an organization who's been working with the communities on this issue, this
Great.
is what people have been experiencing. This is why the issue is important. And here are the solutions we heard from the community that you should take to solve those issues. So I think that really helps to stay nonpartisan. In the more practical way, I would say the best way to do it is just always make sure you cover all parties.
Right.
Or in this circumstance, the big four. Even if you're sharing like events, for example, make sure you share events that involve, like, for example, if there's an event that only one political party leader is speaking at, that doesn't mean you cannot share that event. You can share that event on your social media in your newsletter, but then you can add a line after that saying, as more events come out, we will make sure to share events from other parties as well. So, that really makes the distinction that we're not promoting specific this party. Just right now, this is the only event that's out there.
Yeah.
But as more events come out, we'll share as well.
Excellent. Really smart. We've got time for one more question here from Cara. It's in the chat. Do you have any advice on how board of directors should get involved in advocacy? Right now, a lot of the work happens within our staff team. Any advice on how to bring our board of directors into that conversation?
That is a really great question. Thank you very much. I'm going to try my best to answer this question. So I think, definitely you can't and really shouldn't do this work without support from your board. So ideally, it would be great if they can be involved as well. So one of the ways I would say is to look at who is on your board and think about, for example, if you're meeting with candidates, is there someone from your board that you can bring with you to that meeting? So just as an example, right? Like,
right.
Oh, and if we're meeting with candidates from different ridings, usually it's really helpful if we can bring another nonprofit organization who actually belongs to that riding. So that is something that you can potentially look into if you are hoping to meet with a specific candidate or MPP in a specific riding. Is there anyone on your board that belongs to that riding? And they can come to the meeting with you. Or, for example, if you are creating some resources or you wrote a blog post or op-ed highlighting or promoting the issue that you're working on, can your board members help in amplifying your messages, sharing your messages? And I think it's also, it also highlights why election period is so important, because now we're thinking about those issues. We're really seeing how advocacy work really matters. So maybe this also offers an opportunity for you to start having that conversation with your board.
Right.
Maybe time for us to think more about how we can be involved in advocacy work. Maybe going forward, it's necessary for us to modify our vision and mission to make sure we incorporate advocacy as part of what we do as an organization.
I love that. And Kim's made a great note, is it part of our strategic plan? Is it baked into our communications plan? How are we thinking about advocacy the full calendar year, not just for elections? On page 26 of the document from ONN, there's an advocacy spectrum, and I'm wondering if that would be an interesting tool to share with your board to get them, because of course we want our board members feeling empowered and part of that decision making. That might be an interesting place to start that conversation around what kind of role do we want to play as an organization. So that another reason, if you haven't done so yet, go to theonn.ca and download their election toolkit, a fabulous document. Encourage you to download that and share that with your team members and peers in your organization. Perfect timing. How about a round of applause for Candice and all the great knowledge she was able to share. Candice, thanks so much. You are a gift, and your knowledge was very, very helpful today. So thank you very much for that.
No, thank you very much. I really hope I was able to provide some helpful information. I also just put my contact information in the chat. If you have any other questions, or if you would like to just connect offline, feel free to just shoot me a message.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Candice. Thank you all for joining us today. I have one favor to ask. Kim is going to be put a link for an evaluation. One of the things we heard last time was we want to evaluate more, and that's a great idea. So we're going to, if I could trouble you to follow that link that Kim's going to put in there, tell us what you like, what you didn't like. We really want these sessions to be relevant to you and your peers. If you could take a few minutes, a few seconds, did I say minutes? I meant seconds, to click on that link and tell us what you thought, we would be grateful. On behalf of the smart people at PIN Network and forcimplewords.ca, thank you all very, very much. It was a pleasure to see you all today. Candice, again, thank you for your insights and knowledge sharing. And everyone, let us know in that form what else you'd like to be hearing and talking about, because these conversations that matter, and we would like to be keeping them up with you all. So with that, we will wish you all a great Wednesday afternoon and a great week.